another edition. Good morning. It's another edition of Politics and Chris. It's Thursday, June 30th. And we're so happy to join you this morning. We're here every Thursday morning, 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. WBPG FM Live Radio 102.9. We're looking actually to expand our program pretty soon, where we'll be another broadcasting. Good morning. It's another edition 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. So we're looking forward to the expansion of Politics and Grits. We're so proud to be supported by Porta Classica in Grove Hall. Go ahead and get your suits and your shoes and your other formal and informal wear from Porta Classica in Grove Hall. We're actually also proud to be supported by the Boston Foundation with its Open Door grant that allows us to do community organizing through this program, which we're very proud to have their support, which allows us to come on to the air. And we are just simply glad to have the support of Boston Praise Radio and all the great work that Pastor Bruce Wall does day in and day out in ensuring that the Black community has access to news that's really relevant to them and their community. It's a very good thing to have a vehicle like Boston Praise Radio to really give a perspective on what's really happening. And there is some very interesting news just overnight. The city of Boston has a new school superintendent, Mary Skipper. Her vote, her support by the Boston School Committee was confirmed last night. And we look forward to following Mary Skipper as the new superintendent of schools in order to really sort of get a sense of where the Boston Public Schools are going. It's a school system that's really not in good shape. It was almost taken into state receivership just this past week, and many of the schools are just underperforming. Many of the high schools, except for the exam schools, Boston Latin Academy, not doing well. Those other schools in terms of having high school seniors graduate with a capacity to really compete in the world, whether they're going to college or going into the trades or going into the military. The statistics around how they're doing, how they're faring within the Boston Public School is not well. So we're looking forward to covering Mary Skipper's tenure and being a tenant of that. Boston City Council last night approved the city budget. There was some defunding of the police occurring. About $2 million from the police will go to youth programming. This is done, of course, in the aftermath of the George Floyd murder by the police some years ago. And that's still reverberating in our city in terms of how we're adjusting our budget. Municipal and even state budgets, I like to say, are moral budgets. They really reflect how we feel as citizens about focusing on the issues and the problems, and sometimes the things that need to be addressed with urgency in our city. So to devote more money, for example, to the Office of Black Male Advancement in the city of Boston, which is what happened yesterday, I think is a good thing. I think it reflects the city's leadership, their ability to focus on those issues in our community, in our city that really need addressing. And we know that Black males in the city are under siege to a certain extent. So we'll talk a little more about the Boston City Council, its budget, and other things as we move across the summer in terms of covering what's happening in the Black community and how city government and state government is having an impact and how we need to respond. City Council also approved uh, Cape Verde Day or Capo Verde Day, July 5th of every year. We'll have that. This coming July 5th will be the first celebration of Cape Verdeans in our city, which has been a community that's been within the city almost since the inception of the city, part of the transatlantic slave trade. 40,000 Cape Verdeans in the city of Boston, probably one of the largest Cape Verdean communities in the country, here in Boston. So to recognize this community for the vibrancy, the intelligence, the working capacity that it brings to the city, it's a good thing. It's a good thing. So that's a wonderful thing that we're going to celebrate. We're still celebrating the city council apology for the city's involvement in the transatlantic slave trade. You know, it hasn't been 2 weeks since that apology was issued unanimously on the Boston City Council by each of its members, where there was a concerted expression to say we're sorry as a city for being involved in the slave trade and for being supportive of systemic racism, particularly towards Black people. So that apology, which is largely symbolic, but very, very important, because it's indicative of where the city should go and may go in terms of the reparations process, which we hope to see be put into place this summer. We're looking forward to the City Council's approval of a race commission. So this apology that was issued is an extraordinary prelude to the process that we're forward to. We are also very mindful that this resolution that was passed to addressing anti-Black symbols in the city, and that connects us directly to the issue of Faneuil Hall and how that building needs to be renamed. 140 businesses and shops at Faneuil Hall pre-pandemic. None of them are Black owned in a city owned building. That's a form of economic apartheid. So we're going to continue that work around focusing on Faneuil Hall and getting a hearing over the fall, during the fall, I should say, so we can talk about renaming that building. It's imperative that we do so. We're going to talk this morning about an upcoming events, really, focusing on Frederick Douglass and how the city's coming together on tomorrow and on July 4th to read one of his speeches, very, very important speeches made before the end of slavery, as Frederick Douglass was talking about the issue of race in contrast to the issue of American independence and the 4th of July. So as the nation at the time was celebrating, at the time of this speech was celebrating its birthday, Frederick Douglass had some words, sometimes supportive, sometimes caustic, about the meaning of the 4th of July to the slave. So we're going to dwell on that because there has been an interesting sort of tradition that's been put in place about Frederick Douglass's speech and how this speech is being portrayed and reacted in some ways, recited across the Commonwealth and indeed New England. We get to thank Mass Humanities Foundations for being supportive over the years for this. But we're going to talk to the person who initiated, I should say, in some ways, this reading of this speech, David Harris. He's going to come on in a few minutes, and we're going to delve into why this speech is so important. But before we go there, we're going to listen to a portion of the speech that has been recorded by the famous actor James Earl Jones, just to give you a little flavor of the tone and the intelligence in some ways that's reflected in this famous speech by Frederick Douglass. So let's listen for a minute or so of this speech recorded by James Earl Jones. Then we'll come back and speak with David Harris. Let's listen in.
To the American slave, is your 4th of July?
I can hear you.
I answer, a day that reveals to him more than all other days of the year the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is a constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham. Your boasted liberty, an unholy license. Your national greatness, swelling vanity. Your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless. Your denunciation of tyrants, brass-fronted impudence. Your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery. Your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings, with all your religious parade and solemnity, are to him mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy. A thin veil to cover up crimes that would disgrace a nation of savages. There's not a nation of the earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of these United States at this very hour. At a time like this, scorching irony, not convincing argument, is needed. Oh, had I the ability and could reach the nation's ear, I would today pour forth a fiery stream of biting ridicule, blasting reproach, withering sarcasm, and stern rebuke. For it is not light that is needed, but fire.
There we hear James Earl Jones, the famous African-American actor, reciting part of the Frederick Douglass speech focusing on the 4th of July and the issue of race and democracy. We welcome to the show this morning David Harris, former managing director of the Charles Hamilton Houston Institute at Harvard Law School. David was one of the persons who innovated the reading of this speech in Massachusetts, and now it's spreading throughout New England. Good morning, David. How are you?
Good morning, Kevin. I'm fine. I'm glad to be here. Let me just start by saying it's important for me to emphasize that the full name of the organization was the Charles Hamilton Houston Institute for Race and Justice. Those two terms are pretty important in terms of the work that we did. So I always like to make sure that we give it its proper name. So, okay.
Proper full name. Well, thank you for being here, and thank you for making that clear. You were at the institute that you just named in its entirety. While you conceived of this idea with others, I assume, about reading this speech, the Frederick Douglass speech, focusing on the 4th of July and race and democracy, what led to the development of that idea and then the enactment of it across the Commonwealth?
Well, yeah, Kevin. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, the story is really a story of Boston in some ways, because it really began in the library of a small organization called Community Change, which had been founded by Horace Selden, who was a minister, a white minister who, before anti-racism, how to be an anti-racist was an industry, was thinking about how does he, as a white person, and others address the vestiges of slavery and organize and mobilize themselves in the tradition of abolitionism. And there was a group of people started really by Paul Marcus who began to gather in anticipation of the 4th of July in a library and read this speech aloud. And they would sit around in chairs in a circle and read paragraph after paragraph after paragraph. And I had the opportunity to join them a couple of years, and I realized that the experience of it was was so powerful, and the sense of community that it formed among those who were reading it, that it seemed like it was something that really should appropriately be made much more available and accessible to people, and as a means of mobilizing and organizing people. And I suggest at the time I was associated with the Foundation for Humanities, now called Mass Humanities, and I brought the idea to David Tibaldi and you, Kevin, and Paul Marcus, and
Yeah.
and we this was a labor of love, where we really simply decided that we would do this, and we were able to contact the governor and work with some people. Ron Marlowe at the time was in the governor's office, and we worked with him, and we created what the first year was called Reading Frederick Douglass in the Age of Obama.
Yes.
And that was what it was called, and it was the first year of his presidency, and we went out on the common, and we had about 100 people show up, and we read the speech, we learned a lot from that first experience. We had some Harvard historians and other folks come and speak, and before we got to the speech.
Yeah.
And that taught us a very important lesson, which is that the speech is the star.
The speech star. So what about the speech should we consider in 2022 as compelling, David?
Well, all of it. I mean, there's nothing that's not compelling about it. It's important to understand the title of the speech. It's called different things in different places, but the most commonly and probably accurate title of the speech is "What to the Slave is the 4th of July," and it's often thought of as a question, but I think it's not a question. I think it is Frederick Douglass saying what the 4th of July means to the slave, right? And one of the most important things about the speech is to understand its context. He was invited to speak by a group of white residents of Rochester to as part of their celebration of the 4th of July. And this morning I was thinking about this, Kevin, and I think part of the tone of the speech, it reminds me of Dr. King's letter from the Birmingham jail.
Yes.
Right. You see, I mean, where Dr. King is talking to his white colleagues and really kind of calling them out. Right. And so Douglass starts this speech by kind of saying, "You asked me to come here today to talk to you as part of your celebration." Right. And it's an experience that many of us have, where, people will ask us to come and represent the race. Right. And Douglass very powerfully, we ask what's compelling about the speech. That's one thing about it, is that in this age where we're talking about kind of being woke and understanding white supremacy and all that stuff, there's a need to understand, and what Douglass does is he forces people to confront the reality of the lived experience of enslaved people.
Well, we're going to delve more into the content of the speech. We have callers already chiming in. This speech will be read tomorrow, noon, I believe, on the Boston City, over near the 54th Memorial. And it will
The
be
recently restored 54th.
yeah. And it will be read on July 4th, downtown Crossing. That those facts are just amazing, in that this speech about race and democracy, which still has its relevance, which still is compelling in 2022, is being reverberated downtown this weekend during 4th of July. Uh, I want to get to that. We have a caller who wants to speak to his experience in terms of oh, the call is off. Um, well, David, let me just go to you. Speak to why you think it's important for this speech to be read downtown Boston on the Commons and on downtown Crossings on July 4th. Particular reason why we should be highlighting the placement of this speech on those days.
Well, yeah, I mean, let me just go back to the origins, and the origins of this event were to read the speech on before the 4th of July, and the idea was that people who did read it could then return to their communities and to their libraries or their barbecues or whatever, and read the speech collectively again, right? With and kind of spread the message. And so that's why there's an idea of doing it in advance. And when you talk about how many readings there are around the Commonwealth today, that was partly the point, was to spread the reach of the speech. Now, there are a couple of simple reasons to read the speech. One is that its historical importance is beyond doubt. Second, the oratory is immense. But thirdly, the experience of reading it has such a profound impact on the reader and the listener, so that in reading a paragraph of this speech, you become part of the speech, and it has a profound effect on you. And that effect, dating back from the very first reading, we hope promotes not only a sense of civic engagement and agency and voice, but of active participation. The point of reading a speech is that it is a form of participation. It is a form of agency, of addressing something. And we hope that those experiences continue on in people's lives, right? And so to do this, where we do it, under the 54th, in that area that's known, by the way, as the free speech area.
Oh.
That part of the Common is known as the free speech area, and it's critically important. And as you know, for so many people, we haven't been down there for 2 years. It is a critical part of their year. People come down to be in community with one another, and to, in effect, recommit to the struggle for justice and equality. Now, the reading in downtown Crossing, I think is, I'll never say that anything is more important than the main reading, but it's at least as important, because I think in this day and era, and as you just mentioned, where we are, with the city council's done, and the new administration, and the idea that we as a city are somehow maybe turning a corner, to be able to share this speech on the 4th of July is of critical importance. And as you know, I think it's really important for us to come downtown, where many of us, on the 4th of July, it's not necessarily the same for all of us, and to be able to come downtown and celebrate by contemplating both the promise and the shame of the day, and the hope that comes from it, it is of critical importance. And that's one thing I need to say about speech too, Kevin. As you know, Douglas does this incredible job of congratulating the nation, right? He begins the speech by congratulating the nation on its birthday, right? And talking about its promise of democracy and freedom. And then he exposes this dark side, right? And sometimes in very graphic terms of what enslavement involved, right? And then he concludes the speech on a note of hope. And that note is that as the world is shrinking, think of this. This is over a century ago, and he's talking about the world is shrinking, and you can't hide. And the part of the tragedy is, of course, that it hasn't shrunk enough to prevent some things. But it is a hopeful thing, and I think that we should stake a claim downtown to recognizing both the promise, the darkness, and the hope, and make that our own.
Yeah. And that area in downtown crossing at Washington and Franklin Street, near the old Filene's building. A pre-programming will begin around noon. The speech itself will begin around 1 o'clock, and I don't think we've talked about the mechanics of the process. We're asking readers to participate in reading from a script that's provided, a paragraph, sometimes less than a paragraph, of this actual speech, and a abridged version of the speech. So on the Commons, about 50 or 60 people will read through this speech in procession. The same thing will happen on July 4th in downtown Crossing. So it's a way, as you suggested, to talk about engagement, bringing people together, and to give voice to this speech to a generation or generations of Bostonians and maybe even tourists who aren't aware of Douglas's contribution to in terms of giving analysis to our democracy and the issue of race, which remains an issue that's central to our ongoing engagement as citizens. David, I wanted to ask you, why did you think that it would be important for individuals to read portions of the speech as opposed to some actor like James Earl Jones to singularly read through a speech? Why individuals? And in the past, as I've participated in this production, the individuals that range across the broad stroke of our community, from the famous to the not so famous to the infamous, maybe. Why is it important to individualize parts of the speech in terms of reciting it, reading it?
Okay, why you got to call some people infamous? Come on, man. No, that's critical. That is critical. I mean, I can't emphasize enough that, and that it is. It's not this isn't a glorifying event, right? This isn't the rich and famous and powerful, right? This is an experience and an opportunity for everybody to participate on equal terms, right? There's no names, there's no introductions. It really is a way of bringing this speech to life through people who have real lived experience. And you're right. The first year, I'll give you an aside. The first year, I looked around and there were some, I don't know if you remember, there were some white workers with jackhammers. They were restoring a wall somewhere. It was really loud when we first started. And when the speaking started, they stopped. They stopped and they listened, right? And as the speech proceeded, I looked up above me. There's that place right where the Shaw is. There's that ledge, and you can look over into this free speech area. And there were about 8 or 9, what I wrote in the Boston Globe, blonde-haired especially scrubbed, suburban-looking kids,
Yeah.
looking down at the reading and listening intently. And then over on the steps to the left of where we were, there were again 7 or 8 young Latino men who were with Youth Build, I found out, who were on lunch break. And they were listening intently. And it was the most remarkable and hopeful thing I had ever experienced, because it was bringing together all of these elements whose paths would never have crossed, right? And that's what the opportunity is as well, to read that and we have, as you said, an incredible array of people who take a paragraph without glory or anything and read that paragraph, and it's incredibly powerful, and it's not about them, not about the reader.
And if you don't mind, I think you've already sort of touched upon this, but it's an incredibly well written speech. It's very nuanced. There's political theory connected to it. There's contemporary sort of observations in terms of what's happening in real time during the period that he gave the speech, which was before the end of slavery. Some have compared or made comparisons. David Blythe, who's an author who's written about Frederick Douglass, made comparisons about its eloquence, the eloquence of Frederick Douglass' speech, when as compared to the eloquence that is obvious in the Declaration of Independence. It is remarkable to contrast the two. I would encourage any of our listeners or viewers now, as a prelude to coming and participating tomorrow on Boston City Common and then Saturday in Downtown Crossing, to read the Declaration of Independence against this speech by Douglass. And you can find the Douglass speech in the long version and the short version on the Mass Humanities website, Reading Douglass. You can download it. I would encourage our readers to do it. But the question, David, is it's kind of in some ways comparing apples to oranges, and maybe you shouldn't compare these two documents. But they are both incredibly powerful and really sort of undergird how powerful our democracy is, and how powerful we are that we can give voice to democracy and be anticipatory in terms of what democracy can be. Speak to that in terms of the eloquence
Yeah, I mean,
comparative.
it's interesting. I mean, you're right. They are difficult to compare. They're as you were framing the question, I was thinking there are a couple of things. The it's funny. Douglas's speech is without hyperbole.
Uh-huh.
Right? Douglas's speech is not, although it's formal, the language is quite formal and the structure is tight. It's not, and it's full of idealism. It has a realism to it that is in stark contrast to the Declaration of Independence. Right. Although, in fact, he echoes some of the Declaration of Independence. Remember, he talks about being subject to unfair practices and the kind of longing to be free. But his language and his imagery is, I think, so much more vivid to me. And I think about comparing it to other speeches, right? I think of, as a young person growing up and listening to some of the speeches of John Kennedy, and people talking about how eloquent they were and how powerful they were, and they were. But I think I think the Douglass speech is up there, certainly with that, and with Lincoln's speeches and with other speeches, there's so yeah. I mean, I understand but I'm biased, right? Because I think of the American sacred documents, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution as these big lies, right? And so part of me, shies away from putting, kind of comparing Douglas, who's a truth teller,
Yeah.
to those speeches.
To at least the Declaration of Independence appearing or being a lie, your reference to that is that there is no in the Declaration of Independence no focus or no care to the fact that there were enslaved people at the time of the writing, and that the writer himself was a slave as he was typing, as you say, this idea of democracy. Um, so you
No, not a word.
so you choose not to compare them on in some sense.
On just on a level of truth.
Uh-huh.
I think so that it's a great ideal, and and it's as Langston Hughes said, America was never America to me, and but I swear this oath it will be. It's yeah, and look, I mean, the other thing is, look, it's a speech, and a speech is different from a written document.
Yes.
Right. And so it's interesting. It'd be interesting if you try, and people do this. People read the Declaration of Independence, right? They do that too, and it has nowhere near the power of Douglas's speech, because he wrote that to be delivered verbally and not read on the page.
Let me bring this to some contemporary relevance.
Yeah.
2 weeks ago, the Boston City Council issued an apology for its complicity in the transatlantic slave trade, apologized for its participation in systematic oppression of Black people who are trace their legacy to the slave trade. I'm wondering if, in your mind, that the reading of this speech has any special resonance or relevance in 2022 in the wake of what may be a reparations movement emerging in Boston. Can you speak to that?
Well, certainly it does, and it makes me realize I think we should reach out to the city councilors and invite them to join us. I think that would be a really wonderful and appropriate gesture. I think that any effort or opportunity we can provide residents of the city both to think about and explore both the history and the steps we can and should take to address that history should be welcome. I don't think that any event like this can be separated from the questions of repair,
Mm-hmm.
right? And and I will say, just in my own world, I also see this as a challenge to Harvard University, which has also kind of made a claim to have embarked on a process of reckoning with its past and relationship to slavery. And I think that that any and all of those who profess, right, to participate in repair can learn from this speech,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's not just the learning of a lesson; it's the emotional experience that comes from Douglas's words, right? The understanding of what enslavement meant and felt like, right?
Yeah.
That it's not abstract, and again, Kevin, it's not that distant. There's a piece in there's another really painfully relevant part of the speech where Douglas talks about judges. Do you remember? He talks about judges getting paid. He talks about judges getting paid to return enslaved people to slavery, right? Mm-hmm. This we read, I mean, every year when we read this, Kevin, you know, there's some anniversary that we recognize or celebrate, whether it's, you know, the March on Selma or whatever. There's always something, you know. Sadly, we celebrate all these anniversaries over and over and over, and we
Yeah.
wonder how far we've got. But the performance of the Supreme Court over these last few months
Mm-hmm.
reminds me of elements in this speech,
Yeah.
where courts are instruments of oppression,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think that we need to, that those of us, you know, we need to arm ourselves in the force of Douglas's speech as we think about how we respond to
Thanks.
what's coming out of that court and what is to come still.
This is Politics and Grits with Kevin Petterson. We're on every Thursday morning, 8 a.m. Today we're talking with David Harris. We have one of the coordinators of the Downtown Crossing event, July 4th, 1 o'clock. I want to invite everyone to come in, everyone who's listening to come out to both events. The one on the Common on tomorrow, July 1st, and the one down crossing on July 4th in the afternoon near the old Filene's building. Edwin Sumter has been coordinating speakers, and he's been supportive of this event. Uh, Edwin, you've also have had your experiences in Boston on the 4th of July, and you, in a conversation we've had previously, contrasted what's happening on on June, July 4th to what 2022 to what you witnessed in the past on July 4th. Good morning, Edwin. Speak to some of your experiences around July 4th and how
Good
this
morning.
resonates with you.
Good morning, Kevin. I want to make sure you can hear me first of all.
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Well, good morning to everyone in Boston Praise Radio and the audience all around the world. Yeah, my name is Edwin Sumter, and I want to preface everything by saying that when people say they're a Bostonian, let me let you know, I'm a Bostonian. Born and raised, spent just about every day of my 61 years on this planet right here in the city of Boston. So this is truly a city that I know, and yes, it's my home and a city that I love. July 4th, 1976 happened to be the year of the 200-year bicentennial of the country. So a few of my African-American friends and myself, we were 16, 17 years old at the time. We decided to go on down to the Esplanade because the fireworks were going to be unlike anything before, and it was a festive moment because it was the bicentennial. We lasted about 10 minutes before a group of white men and kids I remember, in fact, I think one threw something at us, and we had to rush back to our cars and get off the Esplanade. And that was the 200th year anniversary of the country, bicentennial down on the Esplanade. Boston wasn't a safe place for just about everybody everywhere then, but I can juxtapose that horrible experience, one that didn't defeat me, one that certainly depleted me that day but didn't defeat me, but juxtapose that to where we are now. Here it is coming up on July 4th, 2022, and the New Democracy Coalition and other organizations are putting together a speech at Downtown Crossing where we are going to do a public speaking of the Frederick Douglass speech, What to the Slave is the 4th of July. That's something that I don't even think could have happened back in 1976, Downtown Crossing. The city of Boston, led by brave people like Kevin, yourself, and others, have just got the Boston City Council to issue an apology for slavery, for the role Boston played in the transatlantic slave trade. I don't think that could have happened in 1976. My point is this: through the eyes of this truly native Bostonian, the city can change, has changed, and hopefully will continue to change. Getting back to the Frederick Douglass speech, you just heard the gentleman speak so eloquently about all that Frederick Douglass has done for us. Those speeches he gave back at the turn of the century. He gave those speeches, but those speeches had to do with his hopes and dreams for us, not just where we were as slaves. He was born a slave himself, but his hopes and dreams for where we would be. Well, we're getting there. Certainly the world's a different place today than it was when Frederick Douglass gave those speeches. So I'm asking everyone in the city of Boston who can hear me right now, who can understand my passion and emotion around this opportunity to come down and speak or to read a passage from this great speech is this. Frederick Douglass gave his whole life for wanting so much better for us. So if on July 4th at 12 o'clock to 2 o'clock, you can come down to Downtown Crossing and participate in this public reading of this incredible speech on what to the slave does the 4th of July mean, sort of, if I may paraphrase, then please come on down. We could use some speakers. It's going to be a wonderful event. There's other things going on like gospel group and a fashion show and entertainment. But I think also what it will do for you and your soul to just come down, and if you don't read, just to watch and hear these eloquent words. I think it's definitely something that hopefully you could take an hour or two out of your day on July 4th and come on down to Downtown Crossing and participate.
David, that must make you feel cautiously optimistic, you and the team that put the reading of the speech together, that 50 years after, 50 plus years after the bicentennial celebration of the Declaration of Independence, we have this event in downtown Boston, not far from where slaves were sold on the auction block at Faneuil Hall and over at the Boston Commons. You must feel a bit optimistic that the reading of this speech has had its teaching power, has had a teaching power, a pedagogical power, so to speak, in terms of transforming the listeners, but also being an important element that's been incorporated into city and civic life. How would you respond to that, David?
I would totally agree with you. I'm sorry. Go ahead, David.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I totally agree, Kevin. And again, through the eyes of somebody who's born and raised in the city and spent every day of their life, there's something that I always remember and I always like to mention to everybody. And that is, those men who chased me and my friends out of the Esplanade back almost 50 years ago, they're 50 years older and they have children, hopefully, who grew up in a different mind, a different sense, a different time. So they're more susceptible to not being like their fathers or brothers were, or uncles or whatever. In other words, time does heal our wounds in that we change. We're not the same people. I'm not that scared 16-year-old in 1976 now. Those guys who chased us off the Esplanade, they've had descendants now who aren't them. I mean, change only happens because people step forward and change the times. Kevin, you're an example. The young people who worked on the Martin Luther King reading down on City Hall Plaza, they're examples. The people who will come out and participate in the reading of the Frederick Douglass speech. Younger people who have had a different way of growing up. They've grown up with races, sharing cultures, sharing ideas, having friends. As long as we keep a place for the next generation, that next generation hopefully will take advantage not to make the mistakes we've made in the past. A little quick story that I mentioned this. How ironic that while we're talking about this, who's the special guest star musician playing on the Esplanade this year with the Boston Pops? It's Shaka Khan. Let me tell you, that wouldn't have happened 50 years ago. So again, my point is, change does happen. Yes. So again, that's what I'm talking about. Times do change. So that's what keeps me out front. That's the carrot in my eye. But just because the younger people take over and it's their world, we're still here to make sure that
with the few minutes left, David, you're cautiously optimistic, or how are you feeling 2022 as we read this speech and how we are positioned here in Boston with regard to democracy and race? David?
So, Kevin, it does make me optimistic. I mean, as Edwin said, I think that the fact of the spread of the speech is important. I think that getting to downtown crossing is critical. You and I have talked about this, Kevin. I think after the tragedy known as the Seaport, where the city had an opportunity to create a new neighborhood that reflected the city, and it failed miserably to do so. I think that downtown crossing represents. It can represent the beginning of a renewal, right? Of a renewal of urban and civic life, right? And I think that it's important for us to encourage, and especially as Edwin said, young people to come downtown, to be downtown, come on the 4th of July, but then to kind of be as a form of participation. I think that it's not just, it's not just shopping and this, that, and the other. It is our community. It is our city.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that this is an opportunity for us to stake that claim.
Yeah. And we all get back from why downtown? Why are we bringing a Black presence downtown to Faneuil Hall and downtown crossing when we're not? Well, the fact is that belongs to us. That's public space, and we should feel emboldened to be in that space and speak to issues of fairness and justice. David, thank you for the hour. Can you just give a detail in terms of what's happening tomorrow on the Boston Common?
Right. So I'm going to give the greatest detail, which is if you and your friends come through with the coolers, we're going to have water. So we have done this reading for 14 years straight. This will be the 12th year on the Common, and it can be brutally hot, and it's predicted to be hot tomorrow. But at 12 o'clock, we will gather. Paula Elliott, a remarkable vocalist, will start us off in song, and we'll begin the reading about 12:10. People will be encouraged to line up and join us in that reading. And we look forward to being back out on the Common again, especially under the renewed memorial. So 12 o'clock tomorrow with water. And I think there will actually even be a few chairs for those people who are used to standing up.
David Harris has been our guest this morning, one of the pivotal leaders in the Frederick Douglass reading in the Boston Commons. I want to thank you, David. Edwin Sumter, who's a advisor with the New Democracy Coalition. He's part of the force around the July 4th reading downtown. We begin at 2 until about 2 or 3 o'clock. Thank you, David. Thank you, Edwin, for being a part of this. We'll see both of you this weekend reading Frederick Douglass. This is Politics and Grits with Kevin. On every Thursday, 8 a.m., soon to be expanding to 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. live drive time, 102.9 FM on Boston Praise Radio, the signature, the pivotal station in the city that reaches out into the ears and into the homes of people within the Black community, giving them critical information that you wouldn't find in the Herald, that you wouldn't find in the Boston Globe, and maybe not even find in the Bay State Banner. But it's very important for our listeners to tune in to our various broadcasters as we give the news and provide entertainment. Boston Praise Radio, 102.9 FM. Have a great day. We'll see you on the Boston Commons on tomorrow, July 1st.
Recording
and then
stopped.
On July 4th. Have a good day.
Good day. Hey, buddy. How's it going?
Okay.
Well done, Kevin.
Okay, David. Did David leave? Okay. All right.
Well done, Kevin.
Okay. Thank you, man.
WBPG LP 102.